represent a JSON structure in a string
Well,
string? Why wouldn't we
okay,
just keep it as an entire string?
so help me understand exactly what we're trying to do here.
Mm-hmm.
So for S3 in your example, effect
Mm-hmm.
allow action S3 put
Mm-hmm.
object resource that. So
Let me pull up a policy for S3. Um, S3 policy generator. Yeah. Oh, this will do. Policy examples. Yeah. So this is what it looks like.
yeah, I've seen some of these because the NetApp API mimics S3 quite closely, and we actually
Mm-hmm.
support exactly this syntax for some reason without the
So does
version.
MinIO. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess what I question is like, do you need this level of granularity in Cozy? Like I would have presumed that what you want is to just um, say, well, you know, buckets you create, you have basically root access to, or whatever the equivalent of root access is in bucket land. You know, you
Uh-huh.
created the bucket, you own it, you can do everything to it. And then there would be some lower levels of access, like maybe read only, maybe maybe access to a subsection of a bucket. I mean, I don't know what that exactly looks like, but
Yeah.
do we need
So
this full level of richness?
if we didn't have it, then the admin would be missing out on functionality that they already had. Like if we just pass it as an opaque string, then they have it.
Well, so I don't know if I believe that. So like much like we have a brownfield backdoor for people who already have buckets that they've created and they just want to
Mm-hmm.
use them.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't we do the same for bucket accesses and say, look, if you already have a bucket access that you've crafted in your vendor specific way
Mm-hmm.
that's beyond the capability of Cozy to manifest, and you just
Mm-hmm.
want to use it, shouldn't I just be able to create a bucket access that refers to an identity that already exists, and then just bind that to a BAR and say, go nuts. This BAR will give you what you want, and it's a brownfield BAR basically.
I mean, like, why would you wire it through Cozy then? So we if
What I'm getting at is like
mm-hmm.
the default case, the greenfield case is like I'm creating the buckets
Mm-hmm.
inside Kubernetes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm managing the bucket lifecycle through Kubernetes. So like if I'm doing that, do I need to have all these special rules, or do I just want to create buckets and then have basically uh,
You need these
complete
rules.
access?
I mean, you put the rule as star. Right now, we in many of driver we just say action star, so you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Um, but we do create the user and then put the principal in there.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So I'm not credential minting is an essential function, but I'm saying like the most important credential minting function is like the maximal permission credential, right? Where you say this credential can do all of the things to this particular bucket, which was also created through Cozy, and so we implicitly trust the guy that is asking for access because he created it, right? There's no reason to deny the creator any level of access.
that's fair. Mm,
So like that's the greenfield case, right? Like I'm doing everything through
well,
Kubernetes.
actually, yeah. You might want to have. Okay, so maybe I'm over engineering here, so I'm looking forward to your response to this. But what if there's a organization wide policy that's like you can write data, but don't delete it. Like you disallow deletes.
So like that could be a that could
That's an
be
access
a
policy.
it's a bucket access class parameter, right? Like worm,
Yeah,
or yeah,
yeah,
worm.
yeah.
Like a
Well,
worm bucket access, or it could be on the bucket class itself. You could say, look, buckets created with this bucket class will get worm stamped on them, and then regardless of how you access them, they're going to have the worm semantic because we're just enforcing that. And then it becomes up to the
no,
driver to actually understand what worm means and make it so.
well, this is not worm though. You can overwrite it. You just can't delete it.
Okay, well, so maybe worm is there, but
It's not a
there's
bucket
some
policy, is what I'm saying. It's an access policy. Like Again, I'm not entirely sure if I'm over engineering with this question though, in the sense it's already going into a niche use case by bringing up this example,
Right. Well,
and
so
mhm,
in the volume world, we don't go anywhere near here. Like we have very simple, there's there's
yeah,
there's read write volumes and there's read only volumes, and there's read
right,
write
right,
once and read write many,
yeah,
and like
but
and that's it. Like we don't get
yeah,
into
but
like you can read these subdirectories and you're allowed to delete these files and
y-
you
yeah,
know.
but POSIX is different from object storage API. I don't think we can. It's like comparing apples and oranges here because with drives or file systems, you're talking only locally. You don't have multiple parallel accessors from different nodes as the norm. Um, in this case, this is the norm, and access policies are, like my concern is, would we be restricting people who were already using object storage buckets from doing what they could already do?
Well, that's why I'm saying like no matter what we do, the ability to have like a brownfield bucket access seems to make sense, right? Like if you already have something you've constructed that you just want to use, and Cozy isn't powerful enough to have made what you want, like we should grant you the ability to just use a pre-existing thing, like a credential that you have. Say, oh, use this credential. Don't let Cozy mess with it. We're just going to
I
use
mean,
it.
that's the concept of a bucket access class. That's literally what it
Uh,
does. So bucket access class has this thing without the principal in it. All we do is we create a principal and plug it in there.
but my problem is that like if what we're trying to do is create consistency across implementations, then this has to be fully specified at the RPC layer. We need to say like this is what this is the format of a specification, and everybody who implements feature X must support this format.
Okay, let's
And
talk about that. Is it really inconsistent though? Because all we're saying is the bucket access class, which is an admin defined resource. So we've said that with admin defined resources, we can have inconsistencies. Bucket access class is what would have this, and we're saying we'll just pass it along as an opaque string. So we
but
don't
the
have.
the opaqueness is what bothers me because
Uh-huh.
it's not
Okay.
opaque. You're trying to interpret the contents and say that it must have a certain form. It's
No,
like something
is
needs,
it? How so?
yeah,
I mean, aren't we
the,
just putting it in a string?
this JSON that you're showing, like if it must conform to this JSON spec or whatever you want to call
For this
that
vendor,
format,
yeah. Uh-huh.
then somebody needs to like provide error checking so that if I make a typo and I spell one of these words wrong, an error is thrown and I don't just get weird behavior.
Yeah, so for that, we can have some kind of error code defined, bad arguments,
Right, but I
invalid
mean,
input. Hmm.
who generates that error? Where's
So
the
so
code?
driver would have to say this is invalid, and then we'll propagate that error to the front end,
Right, but
either through an
then
event or.
then
Hmm.
every single driver has its own error handling, and some drivers might have better
Yeah,
error handling and some drivers might have worse error handling, and so
but
code
that's
that
always
works
the
on
case.
one Kubernetes cluster will blow up on another Kubernetes cluster. Like I
Ye- Wait, what does that mean though?
what I mean
Like,
is like if
uh-huh,
you treat it as opaque and you rely on the driver to generate the errors,
uh-huh.
then the quality of your error checking is up to what the driver does. And it's what
I
am I
mean, there's
trying
no
to
way
say?
around it.
There
Like you
is a
said,
way
other than
around it.
representing. Uh-huh.
I
But
mean
It's Ben. It's not only the structure. Some storage systems may. I'm just looking at the screen here. You have this condition field with a string equals function. So you want if one vendor implements, so AWS implements string equals and another one does not, then they still need to be able to raise an error, so to say.
yeah,
It's not
right, but
only structural, it goes beyond that. And if we say AWS's
semantics.
schema is the right one, and I mean that that's the canonical one, and we somehow turn that into an open API spec to which or a Go struct to which this field must adhere, then it still doesn't necessarily mean that all drivers implement this.
well, so this is what I'm trying to get to is that like either we want to have a standard that everyone's conforming to, or we
Uh-huh.
don't. And if we don't, then there's got to be a prettier way to sort of take the opaque stuff and pass it through, or provide it to the driver. Having
I mean, just by saying that, aren't we creating a leaky abstraction? I'm seeing if it's possible to avoid that.
Well, I mean, my inclination is to say no. You know, you can't have an opaque version of this. Like, we have to have a common standardized version so that there's interoperability. Like, my default is interoperability is what we want, and opaqueness is only for, the
It's vendor specific already. I mean, we don't expect interoperability for an S3 specific, uh, access policy. This is AWS specific access policy. I wouldn't even say this is
right.
S3 specific.
But I guess what I'm getting at is, like, there should be an out of the box default that works everywhere, right?
Yeah, we don't want to get into the business of representing access, because different people have different levels of granularity that they support. Like again, Kerberos is very different from what this can do.
But if I'm a newbie and I don't understand S3 or any of these things, and I just want to download Cozy, fire it up and go.
Yeah, we can
Like
have
you're
a
forcing me to learn a
default
language
policy.
to be able to create a bucket access class, right? You're forcing me to understand this, because I should be able to create a bucket access class that has nothing in it, that just says, this is the name of my bucket access class. It's empty, and that means I get full control of all my buckets when or something like that, right? There needs to be something that is portable, so that no matter what Kubernetes cluster I go to, no matter what driver is installed, like, either it works or I get an error saying there is no driver that does this, and you need to install a driver. There's always that error. But, like,
Okay, fair enough.
I'm just, if you look at, like, the
Fair enough.
volume case, like, you can create an empty storage class. The storage class has literally nothing in it. You can create a PVC, and on the vast majority of Kubernetes clusters, unless they have extremely weird configurations, out will pop a volume that you can read and write to, right? Like, that's just the default. And
I
I
mean,
want to,
well, that's the default, but there are some drivers which need something like wait for first consumer, and they won't work without it. I mean, I think so. So let's say I'm a vendor and I'm shipping my Cozy driver, right? It's reasonable to expect me to have a bucket access class defined. That's the default. That
but you're
has
looking
all
at it,
these
you're
fields
looking
in
at
it.
it from the vendor's perspective. Like, I'm looking at it
Mm-hmm.
from the adopter, the guy who's considering,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They,
do
when they
I
download
use
the
Cozy for my workload or not? And I go read the docs, and I'm like, okay, I need to create a bucket class, and I need to create a bucket access class, and I need to install this sidecar and this stuff. And so I'm figuring it out, and it's like, okay. And then I want to be able to create a bucket request, and then out will pop a bucket that I can use. And I
right,
should,
right. But you start with the driver though. You don't just start with Cozy. Whichever driver you're working with, that driver has to provide some sort of bucket access class and bucket class
bucket
as the
classes are
default.
provided by the admin, or
No, I
classes
mean
in
the
general
driver
are
would
provided
say a
by the
default.
admin.
Yeah, yeah. I'm saying the vendor would show you a reasonable default.
So I have to, when I install the
It's
driver,
like
go
storage
read.
classes. Vendors show you a reasonable default in most cases. They define what fields are
Oh,
supposed to
yeah,
be there.
but empty is a reasonable default in like 9 out of 10 drivers, right? But if I just have nothing in there, it just works. Like,
Why
I'd like,
why do we want that though? I mean that's an artificial requirement, don't you think?
well, it lowers the hurdle to adoption, right? If I can just create an empty storage class and create a PVC, and out will pop a volume, I'm delighted as a new user who has been using this for 5 minutes. I say, I learned it. It took 5 minutes. This is a cool feature. If I have to
The
go read it, if I have
uh-huh.
to go read docs and create some complicated bucket access class with a bunch of stuff in it just to get my first bucket, like, I'm already left with a bad taste in my mouth as a brand new user. So that was
Okay, so you're
hard. That
saying
was
the UX is bad if you don't have a empty default?
basically, yeah, I'm saying you want an
Mm-hmm.
on-ramp that is very, very simple, that just
I
works
agree
across the
with that
board.
philosophy. Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, yeah, if you want to have ways to tweak it and go down the rabbit hole of complex configurations, like, there should be ways to do that. But I feel like we've created a situation where you have to understand the language of policies, at least for your driver, to even create a bucket class or bucket access class that does anything at all.
I mean,
And
we're
this was,
putting that responsibility on the vendor. We're saying the vendor will go through that trouble, but as the user, you just use the default that the vendor gave you, unless you want to get more, advanced, and then you can go and edit these policies.
okay. So I don't want to take up all the time on this topic, but
No, fair enough.
maybe we need to just like experiment
Mhm.
some and propose some things, because you're right. Like as a vendor, like we were implementing Cozy 2 weeks ago, and we got to this bucket access class and we said, what the hell is this? And we just skipped it. We're like, you know what? We're going to throw this in the trash and do our own thing, and it'll work anyways. And
Right, that's where we ended up with Minio, to be honest with you.
so
Um,
so like that's
so
a really bad sign when like
I
the
agree.
guy who's trying to implement it says this is garbage, I'm going to skip it. It's adding no value. So I'm not saying like you shouldn't be a way to create a bucket access class that gives you something other than full control, but like out of the box, I don't see any reason to give people anything other than full control of the buckets that they create if they're greenfield buckets, right? If Kubernetes created them, why on earth would you want to deny access to use them from from within Kubernetes?
Um, like I said, some policies that I brought up, but no, I'm convinced. So let's see what we need to come up with solutions. I understand the problem. We need to come up with solutions.
But
Is it reasonable? Go ahead.
yeah, so step one, I think, is to decide like to what extent we want to enforce conformity across drivers. Like, do we want to have some minimum set of common access class parameters that must be supported by everyone? And if not, if you want to say no, it's Wild West, there's, well, I mean, okay, I guess I consider like having a default that gives you full control to be non-negotiable. That there has to be that common, like a way to just say, give me control of my buckets without any mumbo jumbo for those new users that are just trying to learn the interface, right? There has to be
So talking about storage classes, the reason empty was valid was because storage classes came after CSI came, um,
no, it's the
where
other
you
way
had to
around.
set up.
Storage classes predate CSI.
I'm pretty sure it was the other way. Bec-
No, there have
I
always
know.
been storage classes.
No, storage classes came later. I was involved in it. So we had Kubernetes clusters without storage classes, and then it was introduced all of a sudden, and we had to start using it. And
No,
most
no,
of the
okay,
using it was just leaving it empty.
dynamic provisioners needed storage classes. There was a period of time when like you had to create your PVs manually, and then the bind controller would bind them.
Right.
Then dynamic provisioners were invented where you could just create a PVC when there was no PV, and something would see that and go create a PV. And the storage class was used by that mechanism. And I know this because NetApp had a dynamic provisioner before CSI existed, and it used storage classes to
Like
do a
flex
lot of
volume
things.
style, right?
This is predated FlexVols too. This
So it was
was
in tree.
huh? No, it was out of
Was it in
tree. It
tree?
was an out of tree dynamic
Mm-hmm.
provisioner. But I mean,
Mm-hmm.
again, this is irrelevant history. I don't want to go down this particular
Yeah,
rabbit
no,
hole.
the question is like maybe because I was trying to say that storage classes have this maybe only because they came later, where they allow defaults. But since we're starting from scratch, it's like saying bucket request. It's like saying we don't have the concept of an empty bucket request. Isn't it fair to say that we don't have the concept of an empty bucket access class or a bucket class? And I know where you're coming from. You're saying there should be a default set of access policies.
So
I mean, a
so
default
so
model that works across all the vendors. I agree
maybe
with
not
that.
empty, but like there should be a one liner that I can put in there that says give me full control of my buckets, that means the same thing on every implementation, so that if I never want to learn the details, I'm not forced to, right? That we're trying to lower the bar to adoption to say, if you want to be an idiot and just create copy paste some bucket access class you found on the internet, it will work. Like that is a huge plus if you can just copy paste something you found on Stack Overflow and it just works.
What is a good um, word for allow all, like just do everything. Star, access policy, star. What do we call that? Admin, super user. What do we call it?
Um,
I'm just thinking maybe that could be the
full
default name.
control.
That could be full control.
I like full control or root access. I mean, root access doesn't really make sense in
Root
Bucket.
through, yeah. What?
But I mean, root has the right implication, but it doesn't exist in Bucket world.
In object storage. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
So it's
Um,
not the right word to use, but that's the connotation is
agree.
like when I create a bucket and then I create a
Mm-hmm.
pod and I use that bucket, like
Mm-hmm.
by default, I should not get any access
Full
denied
access.
errors.
Full access.
Full control, full access. Well, yeah, I mean, but
There's,
what I was trying to say is like I think that we need some basic level like that is implemented across all of them, and then
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with like opaque extensions to that, but we need to decide like where we want to draw the line between what needs to be supported across the board, and then where you're going off into vendor because
How about we
here.
call it permissive? So we can have two modes, permissive and restricted. In restricted, you'll have to specify a policy. In permissive, it's just open. Everything is open.
well, everything or only data level operations, and for example, not delete bucket.
Yeah, in
Yeah,
bucket
yeah,
access, it's what you get with the bucket access. Oh, you're saying that because like the AWS API allows doing bucket lifetime or bucket lifecycle management through the S3
right,
API, you want to
right,
head that off.
right.
I don't
Yeah,
know,
it's
but we
only
need to
data operations.
specify
Yes,
what access to what all access, blanket access means. If you want it to be consistent across all the vendors, then it needs to be defined.
Yeah, no, yeah, it should be full data access, the ability to create and delete and list and read and iterate over objects in the bucket, but yeah, not necessarily manage the bucket lifecycle because that's Kubernetes' job, or that's Cozy's
right.
job, is to manage the lifecycle of the bucket. But
So like by default, is permissive and restrictive okay?
well, I don't want to like decide on terms right now. Where I'm going is like when you're writing the documentation for this, right? Like you're writing the documentation that's going to face the Kubernetes user, and you're going to say, here is the page is titled bucket access classes, how to create a bucket access class. And you say, okay, in order to create bucket access requests, you need a bucket access class, and it needs to have a name, and then it has the following fields, and then these are the fields that are well defined, and this is what they mean, and these are you can have this value, you can have this value. You got to document such that the guy reading that page knows what he's going to get no matter what. And then you have another section that says like these are the opaque parameters in the bucket access class. Go read your vendor's documentation to understand what to put here, right? And that because that's how it is for storage classes, right? Storage classes have a bunch of stuff where Kubernetes tells you what the field means with certainty, and then there's another section that says these are the parameters
Yeah,
that
because
are
POSIX is simpler than Object API. But actually, that what Nicholas Oviani, I'm not sure what they said makes me think. So, if it's only data operations, can we actually model it? Like forget all these other things. But if it's only data operations, like put object, get object, list objects, if it's only those three things, can we model it? Like, can we actually have a real structure? And then if someone wants to override it, like you said, they can override it. Like you can have a simple policy or an advanced policy or something like that. I'm just throwing out ideas out there, okay? So like I want everyone to participate and tell me what they think.
but like I should be able
Going
to
back to
create
what you propose.
I should be able to create an S3 compatible driver that doesn't implement any of this, right? Like this is all optional.
Yeah, this is all optional, but in object storage, I think it's fair to say across all providers, the common set of operations that we can model is like put object, get object, and list object, and delete object. These four.
Oh,
Should, so
well,
if we
yeah.
model
So
them, mhm,
this is the decision we have to make: is do we want to model them and understand them and enforce them across the board so that they become part of our API, or do we want to
that's what I'm
say,
getting to.
oh, okay,
Yeah, should we actually model them? Should we actually go down that route, because earlier the reason we didn't is because it seemed like every vendor had their own format and their own level of granularity. But I think these four base operations are fair to model. I think there's nothing wrong with it. And then we can have an
Well,
advanced mode where people can throw in these opaque strings and have that go through. Um, Actually, the wiring with that for that would look weird in the gRPC spec, but yeah.
well, so this is what I want to get to is we will draw the line somewhere. Like you seem inclined to model all this. My inclination would be to not do it and to leave it undefined.
Mm-hmm.
But like whatever decision you make, that bubbles up to the gRPC spec. Where, like, let's say we decide to make it all opaque, right? Not to model any of this stuff. Then the gRPC spec is just a map string that says these are vendor defined strings. You're going to get what the admin put in there. And like, that's the end of the documentation, right? We wouldn't try to provide examples or encourage people to use one thing or another. We would just say, this is just a carbon copy of that parameters field in the bucket access class, and it gets passed down to grant access. And you as the vendor go nuts with how you want to implement it. And because Cozy either has to be opinionated or not. And I feel like we're in this gray area where we're sort of suggesting you do it a certain way, but then we're not actually enforcing it. And it
What's the
leaves.
difference between what you just said and what we have already? You're saying instead of the access policy being a string field, you're saying let it be a map string. But what difference does it make? Because it's still opaque in both cases.
Well, yeah, but if we make it a map string, then we would change the docs to say this is just the opaque parameters from the bucket access class, and that would be the end of it. We'd have no examples. It would just be whatever you want. And similarly on the Kubernetes API side, the controller that consumed bucket access classes would enforce no special semantics on those fields. It would just copy them straight in without looking at them. If they're really opaque, right? Because that's the question is, if they're opaque, you don't get to look at them. You don't document what they should contain. You just say it's an opaque string. We're copying it from here to here. And then there's other fields where you say, this is not opaque, this has meaning. And then you have to be able to document what that meaning is. And I like the
I
idea of
look for
having,
opaque too. Mm-hmm.
I like the idea of having, at some default that says, I want full access or full data access.
I'm a
that
little
that I can.
confused, man, because uh, what you're saying right now, can it be achieved by simply updating the documentation? This is really an opaque string. I mean, yeah, it's not a map string, but this similar effect can be achieved simply by documenting and saying this is an opaque field, and we don't control. Cozy just passes it along to the driver, and
But from
whatever
where?
policy.
Where does this come from?
Oh, bucket access class.
Right, but what format is it in the bucket access class?
We don't enforce any format. It's completely opaque. That's what you
But
were
but but
saying, right?
but which subsection of the bucket access class is being
It has
copied
an
here into the
access
X?
policy. It has a field called access policy.
But isn't that the name of a config map, not a string itself?
Um,
Like this is where
we've
I
gone
got
back
stuck.
and forth on what's the right way to implement it.
Okay.
As
Yeah.
a bit of
So
But like these
yeah.
tiny little details are the things that I would ideally want to get ironed out, is like exactly what gets passed in and how, just to sharpen up the RPC spec so that it's unambiguous, because I feel like it's ambiguous.
But
Policy actions config.
on this
so it's
one,
a config map, but does it make a difference, like
Okay.
whether it's a config map or if it's an opaque field inside the bucket access class?
Yeah, because you have to create a config map today. Like, it will blow up if you don't, and you can't leave it empty. We found out.
That's true.
So we like, for our example, we had to create an empty config map or a config map full of garbage and put the name of it in there, even though we were just going to ignore it. And like, that kind of hurdle is going to leave a bad taste in implementers' mouths and new users' mouths, because they're going to
See
say,
where it
like,
comes
why
from.
did I create an empty config map to do this? Like, I didn't want that.
Okay, I
I
see
just
where you're
wanted
coming
the
from.
default,
so
Mm-hmm.
suggestion. Why don't we move this aside for cozy one.x? What Ben said before is we could have the policy string, so you want. inside the parameters that you get from a bucket access class and get them passed into the driver. It could do something with it. By default, drivers just give read-write, full read-write access to any account that is minted for a particular bucket, which is the default. If it turns out that the users in the field, when they talk to us, the vendors, are looking for ways to set specific policies on bucket accesses, then any vendor can implement this vendor-specific, hear me out, at first by having a specific field in this parameter string called, I don't know, access policy or myvendor.com/access policy, which then has a string as a field. If it turns out there's real use cases, we can unify it and cozy 1.1 or 1.2 or whatnot. We figure out how to bring this as a cozy feature.
Yes, yeah. This is exactly my preference. To start with something that's really simple, and then give people,
nothing.
Huh?
I would argue nothing. Not even simple. It just doesn't exist.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm saying create a bucket access class that has no parameters other than some opaque ones that we don't say anything about. And then if vendors end up putting really complex strings in those parameters to implement, the semantics you're talking about, and because users are demanding it, then we can go survey all the vendors and say, hey, what are you guys doing about access parameters? Like maybe we need to formalize this and create a standardized way of, but it would be we would be led by what people actually do. We would start off with something that's very, open-ended and just say,
Why do we even
no
need bucket access class then?
Well, but because you might want to have like a read-only access class and a read-write access class, and you might
right now we can't model it anyways. Right now it's not used. So
right, but you can add what the same question about storage classes. Like, why do you want to have two different storage classes if you're going to get a volume at the end of the day? The answer is because people use the opaque parameters of the storage classes to make like fast storage and slow storage, or like highly reliable storage and cheap storage. People decide what menu options they want to create, and they achieve it by manipulating the opaque parameters after reading their vendor docs, but only after they've gotten over the hurdle of creating the empty one and getting the default behavior, and they're happy with it, and then they're getting more sophisticated, and they come back and they're like, oh wait, I don't want all my volumes to be the same. I actually want different kinds of volumes.
So, okay, so we can actually get rid of this then. Just that field.
Yes. You get rid of that field, and the parameters become a string map. Yep. A map string that gets just passed in opaque. You don't document anything other than like, these are opaque strings from the bucket class, and then you're done. And then maybe a year from now, we're looking at this and saying, like, what are you guys using these parameters for? Are you putting special stuff in there? Is there anything we should standardize? And then we can come from a place of like, I have users that are actually doing this thing, rather than speculating.
It's
what to do with the policy actions config map. Fair enough.
It's like we extend APIs by putting stuff in annotations.
Can you repeat that? Sorry, I missed it.
It's like how in Kubernetes we evolve APIs by first testing some things in annotations, which then later become new values in the spec.
Yes.
Yeah, we can always evolve this if needed. Yeah, fair enough.
So okay. So I feel like we're getting to a better place. So the initial version is really simple and easy to understand, and also easy to use and implement. So vendors trying to write drivers won't be scratching their heads. Users trying it for the first time won't be scratching their heads. The worst possible case is maybe people are like, I don't have enough control, but like that's a good problem to have, right? If they're using it and they're complaining about not having enough control, is better than if they're not using it.
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay, so we used up most of the meeting on that, but I like where this is going. So on the return values from bucket access, or sorry, bucket with the grant access, was the other thing I wanted to look at, because that was the other thing that was really weird in the version that we implemented.
Return value from, okay, we don't have time. How about let's do this? So we'll actually go ahead and make the update for this and hold that thought until Thursday for the return value. Or is it a really quick conversation? I think with the return value, you're asking, why do we have a path if you're only going to bring credentials back, right?
Basically, yeah, it was, well, no.
We have two fields in the downstream API. So go ahead.
Yeah, so this is one where I felt it really was essential that we have a discriminated union for the different protocols. So like if it is S3, we need to have certain fields that are always there for S3.
No, so again, access vendor specific.
Not no. So this is the wiring between what the driver has to provide and what the downward facing API to the pod has to provide,
I see.
right?
So
Like
okay.
we don't want an impedance
No, it's
mismatch
still vendor specific though,
in those.
because
I don't think it is. I think if it's S3, you can be expected to have a bucket name and like an endpoint and an access key and a secret
okay.
string.
So well,
Like
there
those
are
are
okay. So okay. So we need to define the downward API actually,
yes.
because there's
And,
this yeah.
and
That's a
once you have
separate
the
step.
downward API defined, it tells you what this thing has to return.
Yep.
And
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
so that was basically my gripe is that we need a very crisp downward API that with no
Yep.
ambiguity. So I mean, whether it's right or not is a separate question, but like at least you know with certainty what fields are going to be present and what they're going to be
Yeah.
named and where they're going to be written, and then you need to wire it all the way through to this thing so that when the driver returns the various fields, like they're in some structure that can be so you can't like put things in the wrong name field or omit fields or something, like
Agreed.
because if you omit the secret, that's an error, and you just throw an error and say, look, there's no secret, this is never going to work.
Yeah.
And yeah,
So
we can quibble about what that structure looked like and what fields are supposed to be
agreed.
entered or not, but I think that there
There
has
should
to
be
be
one.
and it's going to be protocol specific. Like if you asked for S3, you know that you're going to get these 5 things every time, no matter what. Maybe you get some extra stuff. Maybe there's a room for extensions, and although I don't like that, I'd rather just have, you get these
Define
5
one.
things and nothing else.
Fair enough. Yeah. So the plan was always to get into the downward API after alpha, but I don't think it matters. We shouldn't be putting ourselves into that. Right now we use a arbitrary JSON structure, and we've been having talks about actually defining the API. This is a good time to actually start doing that. So
Okay.
let's start with the first change. Let's remove the policy actions config map. Like you said, I don't think it adds much value. We can always add it back later if needed, and with the return values, let's start by defining the downward API, then we'll be able to go back and define what it should return. What do you think?
Yes. Okay.
All right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because the downward API is what matters, and this just has to plug into it. And I'm sure there will be fiery conversations about what that downward API, but
It's a good thing.
it's the most important thing is getting that
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a good plan. Let's go fix the, we'll go fix that. Like I encourage all of you to make PR. So Ben, if you want to make a PR, get started with this. Totally encourage it. We could use more hands on the project. More people looking at it and coming up with good suggestions are also totally welcome. Just like what we're doing right now. So yeah, someone wants to take it up. Someone who wants to contribute, who wants to take a much more a prominent role in maintaining the cozy repositories and the projects, this is your chance.
Yeah, how do we get more people involved?
I think we need to do a little bit more like marketing like thing where we write more blogs, we talk about it on Twitter, and that'll bring quite a bit of people in. So we should get started on that. Again, we were thinking we'll do it once alpha hits and all that, but I we can get started with some of them even before alpha. Like maybe publishing the blog, on something like NewStack or Kubernetes.io can wait until alpha, but like putting things on Twitter or writing about it in your own personal blogs need not wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's get started that way. By Thursday, I'll create a new Twitter account, and I'll come and let you know what it is, and I encourage all of you to follow it and also start tweeting with some particular hashtag. We're all plugged into the Kubernetes community, so when we tweet, the Kubernetes community is going to look at it, and it'll slowly grow from there. We can even add some hashtags for like clouds or AWS S3 or something to get more people interested in this. I think Twitter is going to be one of the main ways in which we get more people interested. because our entire community is there, like Tim Hawkin to everyone. Tim Hawkin was tweeting about the API review while he was doing it.
Oh, awesome.
I got live update about how it was going from there rather than like directly talking to him. No, he was not happy about the format, about how much detail was in there. And I don't blame him. It's okay. I mean, it was the last minute, and I don't even blame us because again, we got the review done on the last day, which is difficult to kind of get it right. So, anyways, so we'll go along the path that we just decided on, and Thursday we'll focus on defining download API and a little bit of Twitter stuff.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, we're out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.